Hey, welcome back to part 2, and we are going to move on to our lining. So you would have already done the outer in part 1, which is in the playlist. Part 2 here, we're doing the lining and then the final construction. So in this part you will need, you've got your 2 lining body pieces. We only need one of them. And you also have your 2 zipper pocket pieces. Place your lining to the side. We've got the zipper pockets. So directionally, make sure they're the right way up and flip them over. And what we're going to do is fold the bottom edges so that when we turn through and close up the pocket, we've got a nice edge to work with. And to do that, grab your ruler and draw a line 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom edge. And do this on both pieces. Now what we need to do is press, so bring the raw edge up to meet the line, and we're going to give it a press. If this is too fiddly for you, feel free to draw this line at 1 inch. You're hardly going to lose any pocket and you'll have more of a fold to work with. Do whatever works best for you. I find 3/4 of an inch to be just fine. And then you fold this all the way along and carefully give it a good press. Do that with both pieces and we'll come back for the next step. Like that. I've given it a really good steamy press just to hold the fold. Now take one of them. We need to make a box, and this box is going to be for our zipper. And the box measures 7.5 inches by 3/8. This is my absolute foolproof way of doing zipper pockets. So I draw a line 3/4 of an inch down from the top edge, a line 3/8 below that, and then join them up. This is 3/4 of an inch in from the sides. That is my absolute foolproof way of drawing your box for your zipper pocket, and it doesn't matter what size your piece is, you're guaranteed this lovely even edge. Take one of your lining body pieces and this needs to be positioned one and a half inches down from the top. So what you could do is carefully fold this in half and then fold this one in half. So you've got this crease line, and then match up the crease lines first, or this is how I do it. Oops. I'll just put my quilting ruler on there. I've got the inch lines at the corners of my lining piece. I just lay mine on. Nice and simple. I really hate using pins. This is the only time I use pins. I have phobia of accidentally leaving them in. This is the only time I actually use pins. I'm going to sew these two pieces together on top of this box using a regular stitch length. Like that. So I've sewn them together on top of this box here. You can see the rectangle better on the back. And now we need to make a cut inside the box. You will find this drawn on step 28. Feel free to use a ruler for this. I am just going to freehand it because personally, if I spend 5 minutes drawing it, I won't follow it anyways. Like that. So this is the shape we need. I'm going to cut on top of those lines, taking care not to cut the stitches in the corner. If you do, don't panic, just go ahead and re-stitch your box around it. It's absolutely fine. I'm going to cut on top of these lines inside the box. Just like that. And what we need to do is take our zipper pocket piece and post it through the hole. What I like to do first is press the pocket up with the iron, press it down and press these sides in. What it does is when you turn it through, you get a really nice, you get a crisper line. And then once you've given it a press, post it through the hole here. So it's all the way through. Wiggle it between your fingers so you've got a nice line and give it another press. Both sides if you can. There we go. A lovely neat hole for the zipper. So my zipper is too long because I buy them in bulk. That's just the way it is. I am going to use, I've got this thin, it's about a 1/4 inch zipper tape. You want the nice thin stuff. I used to just wing it and hold on, not bother pinning anything down. But I've gotten sloppy. So now I do it properly. So with the zipper on the left, if you are left-handed and this bag is for you, you may wish to put the zipper on the right. Whatever works for you. Oh, come on. Yeah. This is always harder to do without getting my head in the shot. arranging. Now my zipper isn't in yet. I will move that in. There you go. Now what we're going to do is sew this fabric piece to the zipper by sewing all the way around the outside of the box. So we're going to top stitch around the outside of the box, but using a regular stitch length. So just around the outside of the box to sew them together. You may want to switch to a zipper foot for this part, whatever works best for you. And then if you can see there, I've just sewn around the outside of the zipper hole, and then I've trimmed off the zipper tape. You can add a fray stopper if you need it. What we need to do is just finish up this pocket by placing on your second zipper pocket piece. So right sides together, folded ends together. I'm using clips for this part, so we're clipping the two zipper pocket pieces together. If you're using pins, just make sure that you're only pinning the zipper pocket pieces. Do not pin through the lining. We're only sewing these two pieces together. Okay. So go around the outside using seam allowance, so 3/8 or 1/4 inch, whatever works for you. This stitch width doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter. So whatever works for you. I like to sew mine like this. So I've got the lining moved out of the way. This way I know that the lining is not going to get sewn. I am only sewing these pieces. So go like this. I sew down here. And then I sew down here. Leave the folded edge unsewn. Don't sew that. This is our turning gap. When we smush it all through at the end, we'll sew them together using a regular stitch length, but 1/4 inch or 3/8, honestly, it doesn't matter. There we go. So we have our zipper pocket pieces sewn together. I'm not trimming the seam allowance. The only thing I like to do is to just cut the corners off, just to reduce some bulk. That's all we're doing. We're just reducing some bulk. And guess what? We are ready to construct. So we need to find our outer pieces that we made in part 1. So go and grab those. So I have outer pieces and lining pieces. So take your flap and the outer piece that is plain, that doesn't have any lock on it. This one would be your front. This one is your back. So plain one, flap. I've already done it here, but I've just marked along the top edge the center. This also helps to line everything up. See? So I'm going to put them right sides together, and I'm just matching up that mark with the center of the flap, which is the seam on the flap. And I'm going to clip these together. And I'm going to baste them together using a rough 1/4 inch seam allowance. I said it in part 1. I have now switched over to my green coloured thread that will match the body, so on the side seams you won't see the stitches like you would this bright luminous orangey thread. Switch to my green thread for the construction now, and I'm going to sew them together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're basting, so nice long stitch length. Right, so once you've basted them together, take your lining piece that has the zipper pocket in. Open your zipper. You want it all the way open, okay? The right sides together. We are going to sew them together along the top edge using a seam allowance, regular stitch length, all the way just along this top edge. Like that. So sewing them together. We just need to do the same with our remaining pieces. So we've got this is the front, and then we've got our plain lining piece. So we're going to join them together along the top edge using seam allowance. If you've got particularly big rings on yours, just make sure that they're out of the way. We don't want to sew onto those. So sewing them together using seam allowance. Like that. So we have two lots. We need to open them up. Now it's because my outer is thicker, the seams are naturally wanting to point towards the lining, and that's great because that's what we want. So we want all the seam allowances to point towards the lining. So I'm hoping that I've got most of this on shot, and I have. To open this one up as well and lay them on top of each other. So you want your outer fabrics together, lining fabrics together. Take special care to match up these side seams. Just add a couple of clips in. And then also on the bottom edge, you've got these seams here. So you want to try and match these up as best as possible too. Things to look out for. Make sure your rectangular rings are tucked inside and are out of the way. So make sure that they're nicely tucked in. This side seam here is very close to the flap. If you have a big chunky walking foot, one of my testers said that she used a zipper foot to sew this side seam here, just to make sure this bit was a little bit easier. So if you're having a bit trouble here, where it suddenly gets thick because you've got the flap, feel free to sew this bit using a zipper foot or a narrow foot, but try and keep the seam to 3/8. So what we're doing is sewing the bottom edges together, and then this side edge and this side edge. We are not sewing these cutout corners. We're not sewing them. We're going to box them afterwards. So for now, just sew the long edges. Before you do, just triple check. Have you opened your zipper pocket? Last chance, Loon. Have you opened them? If you have, great. Let's sew these together. And go. So I have sewn them together. Get me good scissors, and I'm just going to trim the seam allowance. I'm going to take about half off. But what I'm going to do is I like to leave these little bits unsewn. It makes it easier for opening the seams on the next step. I'm also not going to trim the area where the connectors are, and I'm not trimming this seam here, because what I don't want to do is where we've sewn the pieces together, cut off where we've backstitched, because that just seems pointless, because then the seam is more likely to come apart. So just like that. And again here, I'm not going to trim too close on this bottom edge. Again, I don't want to cut off the back stitching that we've done, which will cause it to unravel later. So I've gone quite close on the lining because I'm not really worried about the lining. And now we can box the corners. So it's the same process for all four corners. Pull them apart, match up the seams, open up the seam allowance. As you can see, because I've left the little like tabs, so much easier to open the seam allowance. If they were really short and snipped, it's so much harder to do. So there's one. To be honest, with the linings, a lot of the time I don't bother opening the seam allowance, I just sew it. But we're doing it properly today. So 4 box corners. I'm going to sew across using seam allowance. I'm going to do this on all 4 corners, seam allowance. On the outer ones, so my outer fabric, I'm going to run a second row of stitching about, well, top stitch width behind the first row within the seam allowance, and this is going to add support. I tend to do it more when I'm using thicker fabric because I don't want anything to pull apart. But box up your corners using seam allowance like so, and I'm going to just trim a little bit off. I don't want to take too much off again because I don't want to cut off the pieces that we've back stitched when sewing them together. And I don't know, well, you can't really see with this thread. I've got 2 rows of stitching. So I'm making sure I'm not cutting either one of them. I'm not taking much off at all. If you don't want to take off any, that's absolutely fine. Now is the grand reveal. So reach through your turning gap. Oh. I don't like threads. Reach through your turning gap. And I push in the one corner and grab it with my hand. That's the flap. Just like that. So leave your zipper pocket lining out. So we are going to match up these folded edges, and this is why we did it previously. So we have these lovely folded edges to join up. It's so much easier. You've got a nice straight line. You don't have to worry about trying to roll the seams inside. It's already done. Now, using a regular stitch length, we are going to stitch along the edge, almost like a top stitch width in, but using a regular stitch length to close up this turning gap. Like that. So I've sewn up the bottom edge, closing this gap. Oops. And I can push the pocket back down inside. Time for the last fun part. Fun for me, maybe not for you. We need to top stitch around the outside of the bag. If you have a flatbed machine or one that doesn't have a removable bed, this most likely will not fit on the end of your machine. So you will have to top stitch it from the inside or turn it inside out. Whichever way works for best for you. It's a squeeze. It is a squeeze because the lining is smaller. I like to sew mine this way. I'm just rolling the seam between my fingers so I have a nice edge. And I sew like this. I turn it round as I go so I can sew on the outer fabric so I know that what I'm seeing is a good stitch. There's nothing worse than sewing it the other way and then turning it around and something's gone funny. So I do it this way so I know I've got a good stitch. If you have a removable bed, you're lucky ducks, you can just slide this on and away you go. But figure out which way works best for you, but we need to top stitch all the way around the top of the bag, leaving the flap up and out of the way. I hope that made all sense to you, because I'm hungry and nothing makes sense to me at the minute. So let's do some stitching. So I have top stitched it. I'm just going to turn mine the right way. And push push out your corners like so. Next up, I'm going to add the lock part. So I have this part that takes screws, and what we need to do is center it. So the center of the lock needs to go on this center seam. What I like to do is use my cutting mat. If you don't have one of these, don't stress, you could use a quilting ruler, it's still got lines on it. If not, you're going to have to just do it by eye and see how you go. So I've lined this up on my cutting mat. I've got my center seam on this line. This mat is the wrong mat because it doesn't have the 1/4 inch marks. And this fabric is quite thick. There we go. If you find you've got little wrinkles, if you haven't all, you can carefully shimmy everything into the lock. Again, you can see, well, I hope you can see, that that lock is off center. So we just need to wiggle it, jiggle it, move it around until it looks nice and centered. This is pretty wedged on, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a quick peek. I'm not clicking it in all the way, but I can see that these corners match up. It's not off center, maybe just a little bit. There we go. That looks good. So I can go ahead and add the screws. So I've got an awl. I'm going to use these as a pilot to carefully avoid my fingers and punch holes for the screws. Would you believe it? Oh, I have a second lock here. I'm going to say I've lost my screws, but I'm going to pinch them off of this lock for the time being. If you want, you can add a little bit of glue in there. And this is the wrong screwdriver. Found it. I had to go on practically an expedition because it was in my craft fair box from last week. The amount of times I've done a craft fair and I haven't screwed something together, or you never know. So that's that. That everything lines up beautifully. So all we need to do is add our strap. Now we've got a couple of different sliders available to buy now. So these used to be the standard ones that we could get everywhere, but now they do these wide mouth ones which are specially made for the thicker fabrics. So if you have, oh my gosh, making a right racket. Have a wide mouth strider. What you're going to do, and this is with both of them, place or fold over the bar here, and you want it to make an M shape. I always say if it makes a W, it's wrong. It needs to make this M shape. You want about a 2-inch fold, so you can measure up 4 inches and then bring the end of the strap to meet the marker. But if you have a wide mouth one, especially if you are sewing a box to secure this, you might want to wiggle yourself a little bit more room. If you're riveting, you might want less room. It doesn't have to be an exact 4 inches with a 2-inch fold. There's nothing to say it has to be exact. Work it to whatever's best for you. I am going to rivet, so I will do mine in a jiffy. So measure and mark wherever you want your rivets to go, depending on what tool you're using. That's that one. Now with this folded edge facing upwards, grab your bag, make sure everything's laid nice and flat. We're going from the back of the rectangular ring coming forwards. So this folded edge here is on top. Whoops. Smushing everything on. Then bring the end of your strap and weave it through. So this is the same no matter which side you've got. What you'll find now, because you've made that M shape, it sits really nicely. That's the way we want it to sit. So you've got this folded edge enclosed, so you can't see it, and that sits so much nicer, and that gives the room for the thicker fabric. If you don't have thick fabric and you've got cotton or linen, this will be too much. You'll have too much room, so you'll want one of these ones. So get the one that works for your fabric. So grab the end of your bag, strap I should say, and this time we're going to go through the front, backwards, fold it behind. And again, if you want to take the end of the strap, measure 4 inches and fold the end of your strap to meet that line, perfect. If you're sewing a box and you feel you need a bit more room, go for it, grab a bit more room. If you're adding rivets, move it to whichever works for you. I like to add 2 rivets, and I generally just go by eye. Personally, I never measure mine. I normally do one about here and one about here, just like that. I'm going to clip it for now until I find, because I've made a mess and nothing's where it should be. And this way, when the bag is against your body, this folded edge is hidden, it's not on show. So the bag is designed to be worn so that the straps are at an angle, like that. But that is it. That is Percy in all its loveliness. Have any questions, please pop them in the comments below. And the link to buy the pattern and also to the Facebook group is in the description below. Here you go. Ta-da! Thank you for watching and supporting me as always. You're amazing. Thank you.